Reflections on the true motives of the modern world, of the founding fathers of the modern world. Once 20th century philosopher Leo Strauss remarked that it would have been possible for him to return to religious orthodoxy if only he had found that Spinoza was not only wrong about some things, but wrong about everything. Spinoza was a student of Machiavelli, and the modern world has its blueprint already in Niccolò Machiavelli. Machiavelli was then followed by the likes of Hobbes, with whom we are somewhat more familiar. In the 18th century, Giambattista Vico, a political philosopher writing in the city of Naples in Italy, referred to Thomas Hobbes in his Principi di Scienza Nuova, a work that is systematically misconstrued in our times. It is a work that responds to Galileo's new science, the Nuova Scienza, by exposing its ancient principles, or rather the sources of modern science. Be that as it may, at some point in the 1744 edition of his work, Vico writes, and here a translation is offered, an accurate, faithful translation. Such principle of things, and here Vico was referring to a fear of divinity that is constitutive of human life at its dawn. Such principle of things, amidst his savages and violent, Thomas Hobbes failed to see, for he sought to find their principles, in other words, that which these savages who are supposed to have lived in the state of nature took their bearings from, right? Erring with the chance of his Epicurus. And here Vico is exposing the Epicurean foundation of modern political thought, so Hobbes represents it. Wins with magnanimous effort, as with equally unhappy event, he believed to add to Greek philosophy this great part that it had certainly lacked, of considering man in the entire society of mankind. Nor would Hobbes have otherwise thought it if he had not been motivated by the Christian religion, which, towards mankind as a whole, commands not only justice, but charity. And so we begin confuting Polybius for that false saying of his, that if the world were of philosophers, religions would be useless. For if the world had no republics, which cannot have been born without religions, the world would have no philosophers. End of the citation. The original text will be in the comments section, pasted. Now, what is Vico speaking of, and is this important? Well, if it were not important, it would not be here. Why is this passage important? It is a quite rich and evoking passage. First of all, it addresses the motives of Thomas Hobbes. And when we say Thomas Hobbes, we should understand modern philosophy in general, right? The modern revolution. Hobbes is giving an illustrious structure, as it were, to Machiavelli. Now, Thomas Hobbes says that that Greek philosophy, ancient philosophy, certainly Greek philosophy, had not considered the human situation as such. But he considers man now in the entire society of mankind. Greek philosophy had considered man only in particular settings, not scientifically. Now, Christianity considered man in general, but tied to God, to divine authority. Now, modern science, so Thomas Hobbes, seeks to understand man in general without reference to divine authority. Here is modern thought. This is the dawn of modernity. What does Vico respond to this? He responds that this universal, that modern man, or the founding fathers of the modern world, are picking, is an abstraction in more than one way. First of all, it is abstracted from Christian discourse. Secondly, it is abstracted from the concrete situation of man in the ancient world, so pre-Christianity. It's an illusion, a fiction, if you like, and a bad one at that. And its ultimate source is the delusion of Epicurus, the Epicureans. What does Epicurus say? He looks at particular man, the particular situation of man, and he says, look, there is no divine providence, there's only chance. And so, what are we to do? We are to moderate our life, limit our passions to the bare minimum. And, well, as some might say today, go with the flow of existence, peacefully, contemplatively even. Right? So you're in tune with this flow of existence. How sweet. And sweetness is what Epicurus seeks. Joy. Going away from the world, right? The world of men, the society. because human societies, in the plural, are brutal, savage, filled with haters of philosophy. But Christianity teaches something else. Christianity teaches, in the wake, of course, of the Socratic, Platonic, Aristotelian, Ciceronian lesson, it teaches to love philosophy, it teaches that God is good to everyone, including philosophers, that somehow the universals of ancient Greek philosophy apply to man. They're sympathetic to man. Greek philosophy had given us universals without humanity. Right? This is what Hobbes is referring to. He wants to have universality for the human. So man in the entire society of mankind, universal society, man considered universally. But Greek philosophy had not sought, for instance, justice for all of mankind. Never speaks about mankind, right? We see man in his essence, but not all the peoples of the world, right? And we see particular societies. It's a pagan situation. But Christianity considers the whole. Not only the universals of God, of the forms, the ideas, of Aristotelian abstractions, you might call them, at any rate, forms or formulas of discourse, but it considers the human being in terms of a universal society which is strictly tied to divine authority. So consider, for instance, St. Augustine. Nobody is more representative and vocal about this, right? More representative of this vision of humankind, mankind, tied to a divine mandate. Why does Christianity come up with this? Well, Christianity essentially is responding to what Greek philosophy is lacking, right? So you have the Hebrews who focus on the particular, these are the stereotypes, the Greeks focusing on the universal, and you put the two together and you have the universality of the particular defended by Christianity. And so the immanence of the divine in the human for everyone. So Christianity is this great mirror of the human situation. But here is also a problem that Machiavelli is responding to, a great challenge. For Machiavelli faces a Christianity that has spoken the truth, that has presented great verities, announced the living truth, right? Has great dogmas, formulas that address the ultimate questions. However, these formulas are so universal that they can be easily manipulated to mean anything. If you have a word justice, well, what do you mean by justice? And if you give me a definition from a universal dictionary or an encyclopedia, this definition will have to embrace everything. All points of view, you could say, right? And so be so abstract, so universal, so rarefied, right, that it means nothing to us. So you end up with the corruption of Christianity, with empty talk, right? A discourse about everything that really touches nothing and no one. Right? So you have this, the true, right? Everything is true, the true religion, which has no certainty for us. You have to trust at some point blindly some propositions that we cannot really account for because we have ended up with an abstract discourse. Now, Machiavelli does not return to the ancients. He uses the ancients to build a response to Christianity. He accepts the nominalist position, which is that these universals that we have, that we cherish, do not have an essential or substantive meaning. Their meaning is given by the context, which is ever-changing, or evolving, as we might like to say. So, we can all say, I believe in God, but then what do you mean by God? Right? Not what does God mean, but what do you mean? Not what do my people mean, but you in particular as an individual or social atom, really, an Epicurean man, lost in the midst of chance without being able to appeal to a shared communal God, a true God, God of the fathers and so forth. Scientifically, what do you mean? Machiavelli as a nominalist. He looks at these universals of Christianity and he says, we should consider these universals as they are, namely, tools, instruments, not to distract us from what we need to do, but to help us do what we need to do. And what do we need to do? We need to make the world safe for Epicureans, such as myself. In other words, people who are disenchanted with old religion, which is to say the authority of the fathers. All right, we need religion, we need the universals, we need all of these words, justice, truth, right? Equity, right? Honesty, virtue, courage, right? Among the virtues. Even science. We need all of these big words, these universals, the concepts, in order to establish a free society for mankind, a universal society. Right? Or rather, to purge it of barbarism, right? Of the threats to, well, the philosophical life as understood by Epicurus and Epicureans. Now, do we have a return to the ancients then? Not quite. Why not? Machiavelli is responding to a problem. That problem he did not create. That problem has to do with the corruption of the Christian religion. A corruption that is tied in turn to deviances in Greek philosophy. Roman philosophy tended to be to shy away from the great universal discourses of the Greeks, tended to be, one might say, down to earth. Right? So the crisis really pertained primarily to Greek philosophy, and then to Christianity, though Christianity had sought to remedy the crisis of Greek philosophy. All right, so Machiavelli. Machiavelli, it would seem, is seeking freedom for all beyond violence. And yet, when he considers the universals, he sees them as including truth, justice, God. They're universals. Instrumental. What is eminently real for Machiavelli? Savages, the violent, Thomas Hobbes agrees. Lost in chance. So what do these savages and violent do when they're lost, they're scared? What do? They start developing reason or cunning. This cunning is a way for savages and the violent to overcome their neighbors. And of course, keep violent death at bay. So, cunning, of course, is the foundation of a facade of civility. Civility is a facade. Underneath, we have barbarism. The state of nature, which is not overcome by the facade. Barbarism is not going to be solved as a problem by the facade, by the laws, by our discourse. Our discourse, however, can use barbarism to establish an infrastructure, a society, an order, a new order of things, world order, in which we can all be integrated, even as we remain barbarians. And so freedom for all is secured. Liberties. Now, some of us will be Epicureans who will be at home in this new society, not threatened by everybody else, who is really a barbarian at heart, a brute, but integrated, and so pretending to be civil. In fact, the new discourse of modernity tells everyone that we're all kind, that we're all so goody-goody, that we all love each other. But why? Oh, well, because because there is nothing else. Not because God tells us to, but because reason tells us to be kind to each other, to treat each other as ends in themselves, as Kant would notoriously advertise. How pretty, how elegant, how rational, not because nature tells us, not because God tells us, but because the structure of consciousness, the formulas of reason, these tell us. If we're all goody-goody to each other, then we can all fly toward the kingdom of ends. A beautiful dream to aspire to. Maybe we'll never get there, but at least we're moving in that direction. At least we believe to be moving in that direction. And to the extent that we believe it, we behave according to the new reason. So it is not difficult here to see that what is happening is that this new modern discourse is telling us that we can pretend to be good while remaining bad. And that's good enough. It's good enough to help establish this new universal society that does not need to rely on the Christian God, and that therefore is good for Epicureans, right? For philosophical materialists, for those who, of course, are inimical to the authority of the fathers, to the patriarchy, for those who love to take pleasure in the flow of life. A life devoid, of course, of meaning, of intelligence, ultimately, that is simply evolving, that is joyful in its flow. Vico responds to this modern revolution that we find in Machiavelli again. We will find it even in Descartes. We will find it in all these. Descartes gives a mathematical structure to this, right? Formulas, logical structure, formal, and that this will be, of course, developed very much by Kant. What does Vico tell us then? He says, look, modern abstractions, instrumental reason, are a scam. They offer this super certainty, which is a pretense of certainty. It's flaky, it's free-floating. It is certainly less credible than medieval Christianity, even at its worst. For then, medieval Christianity was not trying to set up, establish, build a scientific world. A world as a laboratory, as a cage in which we would all be numbers, mere numbers. Of course, pretending that we're all ends in ourselves, that we're all little gods. Meanwhile, we're social atoms, the expendables. So modern discourse is not acceptable. What about medieval abstractions? Yes, but we need to interpret them. How so? Well, when we have these great universals, We need to recover their sins by returning to the ancients, to an ancient way of speaking, an ancient way of life, facing the problems of ancient man as ancient man confronts them. What does this involve? Ancient man has his gods. The first in the world, right? The first thing in the world that fear made is the gods. Deus fecit. Timor. The religion of the ancients is not adequate. Does not solve our problems. Well, the ancients did not claim it did. But the fact that it's not adequate, that it doesn't solve our problems, does not mean that we should seek out a solution to our problems in a true universal religion for all. Nor does it mean that we need to become Epicureans and so reject all religion. So let us get things straight here. Old religion is not enough. True religion is not enough. True universal religion is not enough. Epicureans, their life, chance, the rejection of all religion, no good. Certainly modern Epicureanism, terrible, bad idea. What do we have left? And so Vico appeals to Socrates and a Socratic understanding, shall we say, of Plato. What does this involve? It involves the challenge of living in the element of reflection. The old gods are not simply false. In some respect, they're false, even monstrous. But in another, they help us. They are forms of the understanding, if only relative to our fallen condition. What about universal forms, right? The universals of Christianity. Christianity offers a universal defense of the dignity, the hidden dignity, which it manifests, which it reveals now, the hidden dignity, the one that is buried in old religions. So there is the divine at work in pagan antiquity. This divine that is at work in the particular, we could say, is what we ought to seek. The divine within the particular is not merely a universal abstraction. It is a living presence, an agency that redeems the particular from the beginning. So we are saved, in Christian terms, we are saved from the beginning. Salvation does not require our work. We're not trying to build a Tower of Babel to save ourselves. The return to the divine at work within human life involves a reflective turn in everything we do. So now, everything we do is to be confronted as a mirror of a fundamental agency. Right? The great universals of Christian discourse, medieval discourse, are all great as long as they serve as a manner to remind us of the inherence of the absolute, of the divine, within the human. It is not enough to say that, look, everything human is a mirror of the divine. We are to seek the divine, and that means to reflect. To reflect means to orient one's life backward to its foundation. To live in the element of reflection means not to seek solutions in this world to our problems, but to open up our problems to an otherworldly solution. In Christian terms, a solution that is found in God alone. So there we have the motives of modernity, of the modern world. Why do we have the modern world? We've seen. The modern world responds to universals. Instead of saying, look, let's get back to the original content of these universals, it says, look, fine. Christianity has shown us that there is no original content. In other words, the divine is not originally there. It's only an abstraction that comes onto the particular situation of man, which is devoid of divine providence. So fine, keep those universals and now use them. Use Christianity in general to improve the human situation. How do you improve it? Well, you can't fix the barbarians. You can use them. So, at some point, however, this modern reason cunning requires a justification. The utility that the political promises that we find in Machiavelli are not enough. We need structure. Descartes gives us numbers, equations, right? Other mathematicians, Vieta, he gives us formulas, a system, symbolic forms. Then Kant, of course, Spinoza, geometry. We can set everything up, state, everything. It's a whole big system to justify. The blueprint justifies this enterprise. That's still not enough. Kant comes in. Look at these ideals. Look at the structure of consciousness that confirms that we're on our way. We should be enlightened men. And so he will tell us about this Aufklärung, this enlightenment. In comes Hegel. Hegel says, not enough. Not enough. This is all too abstract. We need to see this as it evolves. We need to go to the past and see how, from these universals and the particular, the two have to come together through this progress, this advance, this strife moving toward potentially back and forth. It's a dynamical process. It could go either way, but ultimately, this is the drive, right? The struggle between masters and slaves, what's that there for? It's there because of this logic of history, the reason of history. This logic that is there. It's not just logic that I come up with, right? Not just the universals. It's working, and we can find the examples of its working in history. We have this open book. Not so much nature anymore with Galileo, open book. But now it's history where we see the great signs that we're moving towards this society in which cunning is the great motor. Evil is great. We can use it. It's used by the logic of things. And it helps us move toward this open society, this rational society. Right. And so we end up today with our situation, technocracy, really. We have a lot of universals, the great promises. Hegel's great spirit turns out to be the spirit of technocracy, the open society, discourse, feelings, all these things that we witness, we face today. All of this is a world of pretense, of BS, that is supposed to set us free.